Hi, I'm Chris. I'm the synth player for Glasgow band Territories. Thought it would be quite a cool idea to take you through some Ableton Live setup and how we use kind of effects, samples, Ableton Push and beyond. So if you care to join us, jump in. So this is my Ableton Live template. This is what I've set up for everything that I want to use throughout the set. So the set is the 5 tracks from their self-titled album, also called Territories, which is available on Spotify and all those usual places. So how I've got it split down is I'm using 2 controllers during the set. One is a Code 49 by M Audio, the other is a Ableton Push 2. Those are driving 2 separate sets of keyboards. So what we have here is MIDI. What we have here is MIDI. These are just triggers that actually switch between each instrument. So if you take a look at the Code 49 itself, I'll unfold this. What we have is some effects that I've set up tied to some macro knobs. This is just to control some settings within some of the synths. But each synth is on its own instrument rack chain. Then piano, pads, harpsichord of sorts anyway, then karst bass, and that's the stuff on the code. On the push we have a separate set of patches, but you'll notice there's some script in front of these. This is from CliffX Pro. I'll go into that a little bit later. You click on this button here and you can basically get different patches coming across. So and these just basically select each one. Now you notice there's 2 groups of these. The first ones, if you actually look at the MIDI map, are for arming with what are called ready up buttons, which we'll go into in a moment also, and the other group are for selecting by foot pedal. This is to make sure that they're basically the exact same clips, but I want to be able to have the option to select them by MIDI foot pedal, but also be able to trigger the groups as the songs progress through the live set. So the idea here is, if I start a song, I can click on one button over these ready up functions you can just see here, and these literally just send a single MIDI note. That MIDI note then triggers multiple things, so in this case B7. You look at MIDI and we'll be able to see B7 triggers the dual grand piano. If we look at the next one, C8 starts the song Lonely Margin of the Sea, and that triggers a Wurlitzer, and also triggers what I call the Zimmer swell, which is a pad I've made in the style of Hans Zimmer, as a personal hero of mine. So that single button there triggers both of these. Now, because our drummer actually manages most of the samples now, the ready up button is used to actually trigger these two instruments, and then also at the same time trigger the introduction for that track, if that track had an introduction sequence. That meant that you could press one button, switch your instrument between the push and the Code 49, and trigger the intro sample if there was one. Pretty handy stuff, but that's all just done with look back MIDI, but I'll go into that shortly. So what we can do is we can jump into, say for example, the Code 49. You'll notice each MIDI clip has nothing in it. This is just done with instrument racks and chain selectors. Click here, and you see this is set to 1. Go to the dual grand, set to 3, 4 for the pads, harpsy synth at 6, and 7 for the synth bass. So that just lets me use a MIDI clip to trigger this. There's lots of videos on YouTube on how to do this, but I thought this was a really handy way of doing things. I've got a spare one down here as well, just to kill the input if I need to. So what this does is it saves you lots of CPU cycles and allows you to load multiple patches, and you're only actually firing the patch through the instrument that you want. You're not sending MIDI to all of these at once, you're only sending it to the one that's selected in the chain, which is denoted by clicking this little button. And you can see each chain selection option here. In this case there's 2 chains on the same number, and that's because these 2 synthesizers are actually batched together, and they're also on a key map, so you can actually select this here and you can see that half the keyboard's been split for the bass, which sounds like at the bottom and at the top. Pretty handy, which means you can control your zones and your splits and your chains all at the same time. It just means that you have control of everything that you want to switch between, and you can do graceful changes, you can do blends, you can do all sorts of things. So that's really helpful. So that covers both of them. The push is exactly the same situation, only it's still got the chain selector functionality, same as the code, but the difference here is that the push itself can change scales. Now, Ableton Push itself doesn't have scale control inside of Ableton. You can change your scale, save the project and reopen it, and you'll get the scale functionality back. But in this case, I was actually wanting to change scales between songs or between patches. So what I've actually got here is this triggers not only the instrument that I want to use, so I need to arm that. Triggers not only the instrument that I want to use, but also changes the scale. So if I'm playing the same key, I get a different scale as well. So what this is done through a thing called ClipX Pro, which is a add-on plugin, which I believe is about $30 or €30. And what that allows you to do is put these little square brackets on the front, and you can just basically type in your script, separated by a semicolon, just if you want to give it an actual name, just so you can remember what the actual patch is. And you can trigger this, it will switch your chain selector for your instrument, and it also let you switch the scale of the actual Ableton Push hardware to lock into the scale that you want to play on. So that's really, really handy, because otherwise it's like 3 button presses in the middle of a performance that you don't want to have to remember, but also there's that kind of pressing buttons and being in a rush between parts. So that's very, very handy. Moving on, we've got samples. Samples are all handled again by MIDI triggers. Stop this. Our MIDI triggers are done through the same situation as the instrument selection, except it's not actually triggering a chain. What it's doing is just triggering a sample using a sampler underneath. So in this case, you've got the introduction to the song Fathoms. And you'll notice that that actually has, let's open this up, the Fathoms samples here. And from here you can find the overall sample that plays the intro. This is actually the version that was built for the album, so that we can actually keep a consistent introduction. And all that does is sends that MIDI note D sharp -1, and that sends that to the sampler, triggers the sample, and off it goes. Quite a few of these are set up in such a way that they're just long intro samples, so there's no looping going on or anything like that. Same with the generation samples, a spoken word sample at the end of the song, again with the end drone as well. What I do build in is chokes. So a choke is just a choke group. So if you've got a MIDI clip and you play it on choke group 1 and you've got another MIDI clip on choke group 1, it'll cut it out. So if I play this, and what that will do is that will basically cut out across the other one. If you want two samples to overlap in the same bank, you simply set your choke groups to separate numbers so that they don't cut over each other in terms of actually stopping the previous sample. I use choke groups quite a lot for just to control long samples, because when you're triggering something in sampler, you click on a go button, you can't stop it from there, so you need something to cut in. So the choke is literally just a MIDI clip with one note in it that doesn't trigger anything else but belongs to the same group. Same across all the other tracks. We have a series of samples across the tracks that just get used to kind of trigger between each song, and at the end here you'll notice there's a transition clip as well. Again, same mode as this here, so the chokes and everything else. You play the transition, and that you notice that fades out. That what this actually does is triggers the audio with a MIDI clip and then loops after a fashion, which means that the track continues to play. So if we trigger this transition, pump this up so it can through the speakers, and these are set to toggle so that I can click them again, and they'll fade out gracefully, so you're not getting a hard cut when you stop them. So that's quite handy. The band usually play over the top of these in different ways as well, just to kind of make it a little bit more organic. So that's pretty handy stuff, just so you can switch between things. Again, the transitions are set separately from everything else, so these are on their own choke group, and they're also in toggle mode, which means that they can be played like that and then turned back off. So that's just something I need to keep in mind, but it also means that they're independently controlled. Each track's independently managed. Again, same thing, same process across all of the tracks. I do normally have a spare track up here which is for effects processing, but I'm actually working on building a new version of that at the moment, so I can control that from the pads with a momentary switch on the Code 49. Over to the ready up section. This is what I was referring to earlier. So each individual track has its own ready up button. This is using a thing called Loop MIDI. So Loop MIDI is a free tool. You plug it in, you create one MIDI port. It's pretty straightforward. You just create the port and forget about it, leave it running in the background, and it becomes a MIDI output socket, which means that you can then trigger, for example, this part here, hit play, and it will trigger. If you notice when I click on this, you'll see this dual grand lights up. If I click on this, these two light up because these are the two patches used at the start of Lonely Margin of the Sea. Resac uses this, Resac Karst. Two Maps uses the grand piano on the push, and Cities Over Centuries uses the pad grit Cities Over Centuries patch. So each one of these triggers that, but you can also set these up to enable your actual patches. So to do that for an example, the way you actually set this up in order to actually configure it, so let's say for example we wanted to bring this introduction to Fathoms in at the same time as the rest of the patches, we simply click on loop, and that'll keep playing this around and round and round, and that just keeps sending that MIDI note, and that allows us to go and select what we actually want to arm. So we click this, hit MIDI, click on intro, and you'll notice that that popped. If I click on another part, it'll try and replace it. So I can do it with this one, and you notice it just keeps looping. Every time that triggers, it assigns that MIDI note to that function. So I'll take this one away because we don't want that, and off it goes. So you'll notice if I go to my Wurlitzer, and then all I do is click on this Fathoms ready up, this is going to trigger the MIDI note that's triggering this sample and change my patch. And you'll notice that it looped there. That's because I've left my loop on by accident. That's not very good, so let's do that again. So if I'm playing the Wurlitzer, I can use my ready up button, which basically will trigger this sample and also switch my patch to that at the exact same time. So if I was starting the track, I'd hit ready up, and that's triggered both that, and that's me ready to play that song. So I don't need to think about which patch am I selecting, what track introduces it. Everything's in place for me. That's especially helpful when I go to things like Lonely Margin of the Sea, which is in a particular scale. In this case, the push gets switched to root scale of E, and it switches my patch at the same time while setting up, I believe, the grand piano. No, it's the Wurlitzer on that one. Resac Karst. So this is all really useful stuff. Resac Karst as well relies on a particular gain stage. So I've got a little script from CliffX that basically says open brackets volume 110, and that just makes sure that volume setting is where it needs to be because it requires a certain level of volume to kick in the gain that it uses. So it's for a distortion filter. So I bring this all the way down, and I was playing Wurlitzer again. Probably can't hear that very well. But then I click on this to play that bass line, it automatically brings this back up, which is ideal. Additional bits I've got are these guys, these are quiet mode. Basically they're just there so that I can click one of these buttons and it'll quieten down the master volume. It's actually a utility gain in the master volume that's configured there. So all I'm doing is controlling that, sending a MIDI message to say turn that down or turn it up. And it just means that if we're practicing in the rehearsal rooms, the band can actually speak over each other. If I want to still kind of leave something playing but turn the volume down, I've got a fade there that's dedicated, and a fade that comes right back up to where it should be. Just saves a lot of messing around with master volumes and such. And then fade kill is just if we were doing, like, you know, a long transition or something we wanted to fade over time, we can press that one button and it will drift all of the kind of samples and everything down at the same time. Finally, there are these switches here which are for the these ones at the top here, these MIDI switches are actually assigned to my MIDI commander. This has some limitations because in custom mode, which is actually armed by holding down the third button and turning on, the pedal will send MIDI CC across each one of these pedals. They're a little bit noisy, but nothing much worse than likes of a Helix or whatever. It's USB controlled, that's ideal, and it's also USB powered, as you can see by the one cable going in. The problem with it is that the up and down banks do not change the MIDI CC message, which is a little bit of a pain. I'm actually speaking to the manufacturer about that just now. So yeah, the idea here is that with this enabled, you can actually see in Ableton pressing each pedal allows me to change between my patches, because although I've got ready ups set in place, the reality of it is that the ready ups don't work fully because the songs change halfway through, and because we're a live band that doesn't run direct sequences, we tend to make sure that we can kind of do everything organically. We don't want to be tied to a sequence or anything like that. We're trying to maintain a situation where our drummer doesn't have to be locked to a click at all times. And finally, on that note, the tool, we're still testing this out, we haven't used it yet, is called Beat Seeker. This is quite a cool little function. We're going to be experimenting with this on the new record as we start writing new material. But you can find that under Max for Live. I say you can find that, you have to buy it. I think it was only like $20 or something like that. You drop that onto any track, and that actually controls your timing. So if you've got a track playing and you want to have control of it, you can literally just use Beat Seeker, and say for example you take a single microphone, plug it into a spare socket on your interface for an input, plug it in, and then you can just send hits and it'll measure the tempo from that. So this will basically listen to your drummer, the idea of it being that Ableton becomes the slave for your drummer as opposed to the traditional other way around. So we're going to have a play with that as well, but that's quite a cool little tool. You just pop it on there, and as you kind of change out what it's listening for, it will basically update the tempo of the track. Very, very cool stuff. So we'll have a play with that, and we'll do an in-depth video on it once we've actually got it working, once we've actually given it a good test, and you can have a look at it there. So yeah, thanks for joining me. If you have any questions or anything, pop them down in the comments. I'll be happy to follow up. Go and check our music out on www.territoriesmusic.co.uk, and we've got a bunch of gigs lined up. You can see some tickets available there if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, you're welcome to come over and join. But in the meantime, we're going to keep working on some new material, and we're going to keep gigging this album out, so we hope you'll be able to see us soon. Thanks for joining me. Take care.